Hey everyone, this is Dins and welcome to another video. I know it's been a while since I did the last one. I was trying so hard to be consistent there. I had a bit of a streak going even, but alas, I didn't really manage. It's been a while since you heard me. That being said, I think considering the size of this drawing and the length of this video, I hope you can forgive me for taking quite a while to get this one out of the door. Yes, I am back at it again on these streets with ridiculously time-consuming, self-indulgent D&D art. If that's not my brand, then I don't know what is. And this time I actually do have an excuse. It's birthdays. This is another illustration for my homebrew D&D campaign, and all of my players happen to have their birthdays like a month or two apart from each other, which is perfect. They're all in the summer, which also happens to be around the time that we have the 1-year anniversary of the campaign itself, so I figured it was the perfect time. And on top of that, about a month or two ago, we also finished the first kind of arc of the campaign, the first leg of the story, so I may as well cap that off with a little illustration to celebrate, because it was my first time as a DM, successfully running something this long, writing something this long. When I started, I really wasn't certain that we would even hit this point, so I figured for me as an artist it would be a fun challenge to draw all of the characters, all of the NPCs, or the most important ones anyway, of this arc together, and then also, for me as a DM, it would be fun to be able to look back on this. That's plenty of preamble, I'd say. This video I'm going to, well, first of all, talk a little bit about my drawing process. This is still an art video. I'll tell you a little bit about my process and about kind of how I went about making this drawing, planning it out. But then of course afterwards I will tell you a little bit more about how the first arc went. And then at the end I'll tell you a little bit more about the individual characters while I'm coloring them. Talk to you about what they've been up to since the last time. Because yes, if you're new to my channel and this is your first time viewing any of my videos, you don't know who any of these people are. But if you have been on my channel before, you'll know that I've already made 2 videos where I talk about several of the characters in this illustration. One kind of centered about the player characters and one the non-player characters, or at least 5 of them, several of which return in this illustration. So the veterans of my channel, as it were, already have a little bit of context for what I'm about to talk about, but for those who don't, I will kind of give you the basics so you can follow along, because quite a bit has happened since those first videos. If you enjoy any of the stuff I talk about, I will leave links in the description so you can go check those out for more context, of course, and also for more of my artwork. But with all of that out of the way, let's just start off by actually talking a little bit about the art that you're seeing. Right now in the background, I'm working on the inks, as you can see. It's the biggest drawing I've ever really done, with 15 characters in total. The recording alone of this was almost 30 hours. I did not record the sketching process. I did not record the kind of background rendering process because the amount of footage and how big the folder was getting was a little bit overwhelming. I've never really edited down that much, and I was afraid that speeding it all up was going to make it almost too hard to follow, because at that point you're going so fast that you can't really tell what's going on. For now, you're going to be seeing the inking process and the coloring process, and that's kind of the important part anyway. But yeah, it took me a while. So first of all, I'll show you the actual sketch, which I didn't really record, but to give you a bit of context, as we're working so zoomed in on the individual inks right now. As you can tell, the composition of it is pretty straightforward. With this many characters, I was a little bit out of my depth, so I decided to go for something quite simple and quite symmetrical, at least to the best of my abilities. At the top you see kind of the 2 antagonists for this arc. They're both not really overarching either, because it is kind of the introductory arc to the campaign. They're very different from one another, but both kind of iconic in their own way, even if one is a little bit more forgettable than the other. And then, of course, at the bottom you see the player characters, who I will be rendering first, of course, as they're the most important ones. On the note of that rendering, I usually do my best not to flip the canvas too much when I know I'm recording, but for this one I kind of failed that this time around. I have to be entirely honest with you. I flipped the canvas rather egregiously because it helps reduce strain on my wrist. I'm someone who draws for a living, and then I also draw as a hobbyist when I get home from work. So that's a lot of strain going on my wrist and on my hand all the time. So I usually try and flip the canvas to kind of reduce that, but it also means that when you speed that up to like 50 times, it becomes kind of a clusterfuck to look at. So I really hope you can forgive me for that. I think it's gonna be a bit less bad when we get to the actual coloring stage. But yeah, c'est la vie, I'm afraid. There's really no way around that, besides me reserving more brain cells to remind myself that I am recording this for YouTube. But you know, when you do that, it just puts on the pressure and you get a little bit more antsy and less confident in your drawing. At least I do. So I'm trying to find a balance, I suppose. I hope it's not too nauseating. Now for the actual kind of drawing method, once again I inked with a rather simple brush. I haven't really gotten the hang of the whole, you know, switching brushes around, working with texture and all of that. I tend to fall back on the same kind of brush all the time. But it does provide kind of a smooth, soft result that I'm very fond of. Nothing really special there. If you've seen any of my previous art videos, that part of the process is more or less the same. The coloring though is a little bit different this time around. For the previous videos, I usually work by putting the flats on first, then coloring with the multiply layer, because it's a bit easier to make all of the shadow colors consistent across such a big illustration. And then I would overpaint the whole thing on just a simple color layer first, and then even over the lines to just soften it up a bit. For this one, because there were so many characters, I did not do that this time. It would be way too time consuming. So I made a little color mock-up that you will see me kind of bringing up alongside the main illustration when we get to the actual coloring stage. It's kind of a separate file where I put some flat colors under the sketch, put on some multiply and screen layers to bring some shadows and highlights into these colors, then did some basic color editing with an overlay layer and some curves to bring in more contrast, and then I will be color picking pretty much from that and just coloring all directly onto one color layer for the entire drawing. It's a bit more of a simplistic way of working, but it's just a lot faster for me to do that than to work with two separate layers and then going back and overpainting. The result is maybe a little bit sloppier. I think it's hard for me to tell, to judge my own art. I did use a separate layer to do a little bit of edge highlighting, to just, make it a little bit more visually interesting to look at and to help kind of set the characters apart from the background. But other than that, yeah, I tried doing most of it on one layer. It just speeds up the process so much more. No real overpainting in this one either. Yeah, I guess I'm trying new things. Considering that the first videos I did on this channel was entirely lineless art, I'd say, you never stop learning, you never stop experimenting, and that goes for me too, even if I've been in this gig for like almost 2 decades now. I didn't really record myself working on the background or the VFX, if I can call it that, for this piece, by which I mean the star fields, the water magic going on in the top right, things like that, just because I already had so much footage to sift through and to store on my computer that I figured I'd save myself that, because it was going to be a lot of noodling around anyway. But it's already enough footage as it is, I think. It would have been a little bit disorienting if it had been even longer than it is now. In the end, I do really like how this piece came out, even if I had to do a fair bit of color balancing at the end to pull it all together. There's so many designs, so many characters going on in this piece that it turned into a little bit of a cacophony, but I am quite glad with the way that I managed to pull it all together in the end. And I'm always proud of myself when I complete a piece like this, when I've challenged myself, even if it's not necessarily the best work that I've ever done, it's not the best anatomy, not the best coloring that I've ever attempted, but just knowing that I've spent the hours, as it were, and spent the time and the effort on making a piece like this, I can always be quite proud of myself when I look back, which is, I guess, why I do so many pieces like this. With that all out of the way though, I think it's finally time to move on from the art and start talking a little bit about the campaign itself, which I think is what some of you are here for. If you watched the last 2 videos, you know a fair bit already about my campaign from Wandering Isle, but for those of you who are just tuning in, I will kind of give you the basics again. So my homebrew campaign is the first time I'm ever running a campaign, and the first time doing homebrew at this scale as well. It's named From the Wandering Isle, and it kind of follows the crew of a pirate ship known as the Young Kraken, who find themselves stranded in the middle of the desert with a 18-month hole in their memories that they're hoping to fill again, hoping to retrieve by following the one lead that they were left with, which is a man known as Alluvial, who is supposedly responsible for taking these memories, and who had a bit of a vested interest in seeing them far removed from whatever action is about to unfold in the rest of the world. So it kind of follows them as they travel the long way north to where this man can supposedly be found, and along the way, of course, they discover everything that happened in these 18 months, and quite a bit happened. They discover that their country that they're all from is on the brink of an all-out war after the king was mysteriously, well, they don't know if he was killed or not, but he died suddenly. There was also a terror attack on a holy city. It also seems that they're on the brink of a kind of a religious schism between the divine god of the sun and the arcane god of the moon, with arcane casters pretty much all around the continent being rounded up and drafted against their will, which of course at least some of the party is about to get very much involved in. So all of this sucks a lot for them, considering how many of the player characters are being rolled up in this conflict in one way or another, and it sure is a colorful background for all of the smaller stories that are taking place in the campaign. And of course, in the background of all of this, there's the mysterious Alluvial, who I've talked about in previous videos. He's a celestial who betrayed his own god several years ago in an action that actually made him a war hero, but it involved some spicy war crimes to protect his country from attack. His motivations in the current leg of the campaign are a mystery, but clearly he's responsible for their missing memories and for this phenomenon of the Wandering Isle that the campaign is named after, which is an elusive landmass teleporting all over the globe, all over to other planes even, chased by fiends wherever they go. So far the party has not yet really encountered the island themselves, but wherever they go it causes chaos, which often the party has to deal with. So it's a lot. There's a lot going on, as you can tell. I am a little obsessed with world building and writing and character building, but I'm sure you can imagine why I'm so invested in this story, and why my players are so invested in this story as well. If you are interested in this at all, please do consider watching those last two videos where you'll hear a little bit more about the world and about the NPCs that are kind of at the base of this story. For now though, I will just stick to the basics and kind of update you guys on what's been happening. The first arc of the campaign mostly centered around a more local, contained storyline, as it was kind of an introduction to the world for the players, as well as for the characters, I suppose. The main conflict here, aside from our pirates waking up in the desert and catching their bearings, of course, was centered around the desert city of Koshar, where their leader slash bankroller of the guard was just murdered. They also found out during their investigation into the murder that the town's supply of water that made their king of the Oasis insanely rich was actually supplied by a little water genie who, much like them, was stranded here out of nowhere. And on top of that, they uncovered some of the rather dark machinations of a bandit group known as the Sable Serpent, led by a cultist of the Blood God, who had some very grim plans with a group of refugees that they had recently captured. So yeah, of course, in the end, the party saved the day, destroyed the bandit group, and unmasked the king of the Oasis for being kind of a slaver, I guess. And of course they adopted the little water genie into their group, now back on the road for their next adventure. And with that, after about 16 sessions in total, we kind of triumphantly closed the book on the first arc of the story. And right now we are currently in kind of an interlude section. I'm not going to tell you anything about that yet, but rest assured there's going to be future videos. And of course what I just told you were just the broad outlines of arc number 1. Quite a lot of crazy things happened that I did not predict as a DM, but that I found incredibly entertaining to witness. Some of which I've already talked about on the channel before, actually. Some of you might recognize these characters I've been inking too. So in light of that, if you'd indulge me, I'd like to zoom in a little bit more for the second half of the video and kind of character by character tell you a little bit more about who these people are and the kind of things that they've been up to in this arc. So how about we get right to that? First up here, wielding his trusty lute, we have Filion Springcrest, the lost prince of the Summer Court, a young archfey, forever pursued by the Gloaming Queen and her assassins, or so he claims anyway. The kinds of things he gets up to session to session are just about what you'd expect when you hear the words Fey Bard, let's be honest. He's manipulative, he's charming, he's a pathological liar, a chaos gremlin, and he's of course just about genuine enough in how much he wants to be liked by everyone that it's a little bit pathetic. This leg of the campaign has not really focused on his story in particular all that much yet, but he managed to make himself a pretty crucial part of it anyway when he developed a rather hilariously ill-advised romance, enemies to lovers romance even, with the serial killer that they accidentally released in one of the first sessions, Simeon, who I've talked about a couple of times in previous videos as well. A romance that started with them shooting crossbows at each other, trying to get the final hit in, and failing hilariously, and ending up with kind of a romantic lunch date in one of the last sessions of the arc. Iconic. We stan. Next up, of course, we have dear Hallie, the water genasi druid of the Circle of the Stars. She's very sweet, very adventurous spirit who's taken it upon herself to chronicle all the crazy things that the party encounters in her in-universe creature compendium, which is just a very fun bit of storytelling that I'm very fond of. Considering what I just told you earlier about the little water genie boy being held in Koshar to summon water for the city, basically, I'm sure you can imagine that the story so far has been relevant to her personal backstory. Young married Aquil, as his name is, very quickly spotted a rather striking family resemblance to his uncle, who is named Asterion, and who's a bit of a wanderer, probably a bit of a family disappointment too, as he seemingly has decided to forego the life of conquest and rulership that a water genie of his age would typically be expected to aspire to. It's certainly going to be an interesting reunion, and now that the party has chosen to adopt Aquil and see him safely back to his home under the sea, it's only a matter of time until we get there. Third on our roster of player characters here at the bottom is Eldrin, a precious, if somewhat naive and impulsive being who's certainly been going through it this arc, in part because of their own ill-advised crush on a lieutenant of the Sable Serpent, who of course met her untimely demise at the hands of Filion's boyfriend. Eldrin is a divine soul sorcerer who's been touched by the god of the sun pretty much their entire life, with the expectation of helping others wherever they can, which they've certainly been doing their best at achieving, but things have gotten a little complicated recently since their cursed sword turns out to be a relic of the arcane god of the void, who is very much going through a bit of a woman scorned kind of thing after losing large swaths of her followers, and she seems determined to have poor Eldrin enact her vengeance. So basically, mommy and daddy are fighting and poor Eldrin is stuck in a divorce and they are not having a good time. Next up is Ezra, the ever-fashionable and ever-stressed shifter ranger / party dad of the group, although the latter is more so by necessity than by choice. They've been in this life as a pirate longer than anyone in the crew and is somehow one of the only ones blessed with the gift of common sense, so they're very often a straight man in the crazy situations that the party encounters, while screaming internally all the while. The fact that I revealed their mother, a famous fashion designer who once kind of coldly kicked them out of the nest, is actually a spy for the empire they're about to be at war with any day now, probably didn't help, but on the upside, at least they managed to get themselves a girlfriend and the companionship of an avatar of the Earth God, so you know, you win some, you lose some. Last of the player characters, but certainly not least, is our beloved Stormzite, also known as Storm, and by the end of this section you'll know just how fittingly chaotic a name that is. Storm is a prima ballerina, grandson to the genius mind behind Swan Lake, now out on the journey of creativity and self-discovery that should inspire him to create his own masterpiece, although he's certainly been finding interesting sources of inspiration. Besides forging a reluctant friendship with a former childhood bully, Storm has also stabbed himself in the hand with a sacrificial dagger just to see what would happen, bullied the devil over the phone, and killed the champion of the blood god with the grand jeté to the chest. Absolute legend. And now we enter the realm of the NPCs, first of which is Virgil the Cambion, a somewhat hot-headed but surprisingly reasonable devil who I've talked about in a previous video already. Although he's ostensibly trying to hunt down Eluviel by any means necessary for mysterious reasons, he spent most of his time in this arc sidelining and betraying his own allies, sniping back and forth with Storm over the phone, and failing to strike up a deal with Villian, while being forced to listen in on his very corny date. As minor antagonists go, Virgil is a bit of a failure, but he's hot and I love him. Mikal, the timid and somewhat high-strung Aladrin that mans the magic item shop in Koshar, is another NPC that I've talked about before. He's managed to dodge the ongoing draft on mages by pretending to be kind of a bumbling assistant type, while secretly, of course, developing and peddling his own wacky creations anyway. He stuck his neck out for the party pretty hard this arc by developing and placing these conjuration runes of water summoning in the tunnels below the city, letting them take Aquil, the baby Merid, with them without creating a massive drought in a city of thousands. Now that's what I call responsible adventuring. Next to Mikal we have Enzo, the warm, somewhat mothering companion NPC that's been traveling with the party since day one. Enzo became a refugee after a village was destroyed by fire elementals, which, as it turns out, had gotten there in the first place by hitching a ride on the Wandering Isle, as it teleported from the plane of fire carrying the party, or what was left of the party anyway, as whatever happened that day seems to be the event that caused them all to lose all of their memories, and it may or may not have killed them in the process too. Of course, the party helped poor Enzo by rescuing her fellow refugees from the Sable Serpent bandits and seeing them all safely home. After Enzo, we have Frey the Feral, a rough and tumble tiefling that's been along for the ride since session 1 too. She was a bounty hunter when the party first met her, exiled from Koshar after she was framed by the king of the Oasis. But of course the party managed to restore her citizenship and her position in the city guard during this arc, for which she's very grateful. Funnily enough, my roles in combat for her were absolute dog water for like 15 sessions straight until we arrived at the lair of the Sable Serpent, the people that she was framed for in the first place, when she proceeded to wreck shop, so make of that what you will. Next to Frey is a character that's not really been talked about before. This is Koshar's captain of the guard, Akram, who was actually elected as a new king of the guard at the end of the arc, considering that the death of the last king is the very murder that the party was investigating this arc. Akram is a no-nonsense, salt-of-the-earth kind of guy for whom trust is something that you earn, and once you have it, he's pretty damn loyal to you. After everything the party did for him, shutting down bandits, saving refugees, and solving the murder of his former boss, he decided to electively ignore the fact that half of the party is very blatantly draft-dodging mages. What a guy. Next up we have Aquil, my precious little man, the wettest baby boy in the desert. Aquil is a young Merid prince, a water genie, and son to the king of storms, supposedly Hallie's uncle. He arrived in the desert city of Koshar somewhat by accident, as he was playing in the tunnels underneath the Wandering Isle, while it was parked in the sea, so to speak, and of course he was whisked away along for the ride when it moved on to a new location, so that left him stranded quite far away from home. On one hand, he was lucky that the first person to find him actually spoke Aquin, imagine the odds, but on the other hand, his new ward turned out to be the king of the Oasis and a worshipper of the shark god Sekala, who very much intended to exploit his water summoning powers for his own gain. Of course, as soon as the party came along, Aquil was more than happy to join them, and they've been teaching him common ever since. What a good boy! Nadir, the snobbish and conniving sun elf, was one of two core antagonists in this arc. Nadir was the one secretly using Aquil for his own financial gain, while pretending to be his caring guardian and keeping him a secret all the while, which has made him one of the richest men in the entire desert, although he kind of already was, thanks to his secret deal with the bandits known as the Sable Serpent, who he allowed to smuggle goods through the city's tunnel network in exchange for speeding up his ascension to the throne. Now that he no longer needed the serpent to make money, they of course planned to stab him in the back and make a new deal with the king of the guard. So Nadir killed him, of course, as you do, kicking off the murder mystery in this arc. Nadir has since been beaten and handed over to the authorities awaiting trial, but whether or not they've seen the last of him, of course, remains to be seen. Next NPC on our list is Simeon, the slasher of Sashari, a handsome disaster of a man. He's already been mentioned quite a bit in previous videos and in the current one, being of course the killer that the party accidentally released, who through an increasingly ludicrous chain of events that at some point involved shapeshifting into each other, ended up as Fillion's love interest. Simeon was born into slavery and managed to escape it only by ending the lives of all of his former masters at once, a high that he's chased ever since, and that brought him to the point of working for the Sable Serpent as a bit of a freelancer. This time around, Nadir was actually his target, but he got cold feet and was pretty swiftly betrayed by the Serpent, making it a no-brainer to switch sides and help defeat them. And here, all the way at the end, we finally have two core members of the Sable Serpent, the other main antagonist for this part of the campaign. Satya Mehrabi, the stern and ruthless older lieutenant, was here for a good time, but not for a long time. After the party defeated her and eventually handed her in, her former accomplices of course decided that she was expendable now, and forced Simeon to take her out. This of course made for some very complicated feelings in the party, as Eldrin had developed a hopeless crush on her at this point. It didn't really help matters either when early into Arc 2, the party found out that one of the only two lieutenants they had yet to take out was her daughter. Yikes. And last but the opposite of least, we have, of course, Nadir, chosen of the Blood God, the second major antagonist of this arc. Tall, dark, handsome, I guess if you're scaly, big fan of human sacrifice. Nadir is an ancient Malison, a very powerful diviner and blood mage, who does a bit of cheeky smuggling and slaving as a side gig. To fight Nadir, the players first had to delve deep into the depths of their lair and save a bunch of hostages from being sacrificed in their blood ritual. And even when they did finally go down, with a ballet move to the chest mind you, they came back just a few days later anyway and had to be killed all over again. For the sake of the party, let's hope it takes this time. And with that, our illustration is complete, so let's have a look at the final result, shall we? And there you have it. This is probably the biggest thing I've ever drawn, and I'm very happy with the way it came out, so I hope you like it too. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you've made it all the way through, consider leaving a like, maybe subscribing if you want to see future videos that I make. Don't hesitate to let me know in the comments if you have an idea of what you'd like me to do next, and of course tell me who your favorite character was. Big thanks of course to my lovely patrons for their support, and I'll see you all in the next one.